So with NBA teams' evaluations soaring up to the tens of billions, we're slowly seeing private equity trickle into the league. And in this segment, we're going to get a bit more nuance to this, as we'll hear from Mark Cuban drop major gems on how it'll change things for NBA fans like us. Because make no mistake about it, your fandom will be pimped to the highest degree. And it's sort of the way private equity is trickling in. It's very subtle, but they are carefully positioning themselves very discreetly to eventually becoming majority owners. And the first example I'm going to give of this is the way Jeanie Buss sold the Lakers. That 2020 pandemic really hit a lot of teams hard financially. The league borrowed over $800 million to keep certain teams afloat, and even the star-studded franchise of the Los Angeles Lakers could not really hold themselves down. That's with a LeBron James in town also. After that bubble season, fans were still not in the stands all the way to the spring of 2021, and that's where the Lakers that same year sold 27% of their shares to Mark Walter. This is a unique circumstance because regardless how things played out, just Jeanie Buss needing the money, getting that influx of cash, I'm sure that Mark Walter and his associates understood that a sale would be inevitable, as Jeanie Buss and her family are not in the proper position to innovate the Lakers business-wise. The mom and pop approach to NBA franchises is pretty much dead. These NBA teams are now a means to an end, which is to acquire a much larger real estate portfolio, which may include casinos, commercial real estate, fine wining and dining, etc., etc. Hey, maybe even a hotel, all in the same facility. So before we get to hear from Mark Cuban, this is going to serve as a nice backdrop, as we'll hear from the former co-owner of the Bucks that won the NBA championship with Giannis, Mark Lazary, as he is now CEO of Avenue Capital, a private equity firm that makes strategic investments in sports. Just peep the way he talks about maximizing fan loyalty.
Look, you only make money in sports three ways. So it's ticket sales, sponsorship, and media. So if the Celtics win again, they'll be able to raise ticket prices anywhere between 10 to 20%. If you have a team that's the worst in the league, that team is still raising prices 5, 10%. Nobody stops giving up on their team. It's actually one of the great little secrets about pro sports. Every year, the whole mantra in sports is next year is our year, right? And everybody believes that. So I think you're always going to see that teams are going to keep on growing at sort of anywhere between 10% to 15%. I think if you own the real estate, you'll end up growing faster because you can end up having concerts. You can do everything within your own arena. So I wouldn't be surprised if ultimately the Celtics end up building their own arena.
Now, quick two things from what he said. The only way you make money from sports is ticket sales, sponsorships, and media. All three of those things have a major thing in common, which is revenue share. And on the media side, that future revenue stream looks kind of shaky right now. Later on, we'll hear Mark Cuban elaborate on that further. But this is where the real estate comes into play. That is not part of the revenue share. The Golden State Warriors, the reason why they jumped up in net worth almost light years ahead of the Lakers in just a short span of time, is because of that ecosystem they have around Chase Center. No matter how much money they make, the other small market teams can never ever touch that. That is not part of the NBA revenue share. And that's why I had mentioned earlier before that Jeanie Buss is not in the proper position to innovate the Lakers. See, Bohm already took this playbook, and Patrick Dumont further intends to, especially when it comes to the casino side. The new crop of NBA owners post-2020, this is the model, this is the blueprint. And with that said, it's going to take a lot of major investment. This is why the NBA owners have slowly crafted the player contracts in ways it makes it hard for them to get these max deals with the 65-game rule, which is a team rule that was only voted by the owners. The NBA Players Union could not even touch that. Tyrese Halliburton almost risked himself to further injury back in 2024 just to hit the 65 games so he can get his max contract. And on top of that 65-game rule, the second apron almost serves as another excuse not to pay players. We've seen the Boston Celtics in 1 year go from a championship to almost a rebuild just to avoid the second apron. Also, there's a lot of productive co-stars who are struggling to get their value. Jimmy Butler almost had to hold out in Miami, going back and forth with Pat Riley. Jonathan Kuminga has been in a cold war with the Warriors. Norman Powell basically performed like an all-star for the Clippers, but because of the new rules, teams didn't want to necessarily pay him around $30 million a year. So he ended up in Miami, settling for around $20 million a year. Also, Julius Randle, even though he's the co-star of the Minnesota Timberwolves, they gave him a similar deal to what he had previously, even though in the last 3 seasons, he's made 2 All-NBA teams and also 2 All-Star teams. Brandon Ingram out in Toronto had Rich Paul saying that he basically had no market for around $40 million a year. That seems to be the sweet spot where owners don't want to necessarily pay co-stars at. There's been very few players to actually get that number. I believe OG Anunoby of the New York Knicks is maybe one of the few guys. But right here, Mark Cuban correlates these players not necessarily getting their values to private equity coming in and maximizing not only the franchise, but the fan value.
First of all, there's 2 elements here. Here, my Mr. 2 elements today. One, transitioning from the old CBA to the new CBA, we saw all the pain it's created, teams and players and, guys getting stretched and all that kind of stuff, right? But I think also they just don't like the second apron, right? Because now the second apron, it's not a hard cap, but it's damn close. And it means that the mid-level exception kind of really is the, better than average player, because it's going to be really hard, even with the cap going up 10% a year. Like if you have more than one max guy on their second contract and one of them gets hurt or it doesn't plan out, you're screwed.
Yeah.
You're dead. You're dead in the water for a long time. And so you're going to see a lot more contracts where a guy in the past, you say, okay, he earned it out of respect. I'm going to give him the max. He'll make 30, 35 million a year. Maybe, the next max, maybe it will or will not be there. Now that guy, if the mid-level is 15, he's going to get 20 or 21 instead of 30 because you got to push down everything.
That's exactly what happened to Norman Powell, Julius Randle, and Jonathan Kuminga. Low-key, they try to do the same thing to Jimmy Butler, but Golden State is trying to capitalize off of Stephen Curry's final golden years.
Protect against mistakes. And I think that's going to upset a lot of people. And, you see Kuminga, you see my guy Quentin Grimes, that the numbers they put up, you would think it wouldn't even be a question they'd get paid, but it's not so much about them. It's about how does it all work within the second apron. And and certain other things, like it's harder to make trades. And so, you can't just fix your mistakes. Like, before you could even throw in a first round pick to get off a mistake. Now those first round picks are far more valuable because you need to get lucky like we did this year because those prices on a first round pick are much lower otherwise.
Facts. And we're seeing that play out with Anthony Davis. The Mavericks are going to have a very hard time getting rid of him. I believe the Chicago Bulls had just stated that they're not giving up any of their young core for Anthony Davis. So the NBA is definitely going through different dynamics.
Well, that one of the things that
my mind is being blown right now because I was curious of why. Sorry, Richard.
No, go ahead.
Why Chicago was stuck, right? Chicago's stuck because you have guys like Zach LaVine and Vooch and at that time DeRozan and whoever.
Those 3 players under this new CBA are some of the worst guys to have on your squad. Those contract renewals that they got under the old rules, they kill you today. It's not just Anthony Davis that's going to be hard to get rid of. The Zach LaVines, the LaMelo Ball types. If the Hornets decide to put him up on the trade block, good luck. Same thing for Ja Morant. All these guys that are in their rookie max that really came from the old CBA. It's just harder to move, and you wonder if the players union at this point, they're a little bit weak because these owners, they're making them pay for all that player movement that took place in the 2010s. Not only that's shut down, but also players actually trying to cash in on their value. This shit's crazy. Owners look you in the face and act like they don't have enough money, but at the same time, they're increasing their investment portfolio when it comes to real estate around these arenas. Don't be surprised if we see more teams relocate to the greater areas of some of these major cities. Got to utilize that space.
And you can't get anything back for them because teams are like, they're too long of a contract at that price.
Or they're older, right? They're older. You got to be certain they're going to get you over the top. If it's their final piece, you go all in, right? But if it's not, or you're not sure, no one's going to take them. Like even KD, it wasn't like there was huge demand for KD, right?
Right.
KD, he's got to be a finishing piece, and that's what Houston hopes. Otherwise, it's $50 million is too much.
Remember, that $50 million is too much according to the second apron. It's no longer based off that player's talent. If they could be that finishing piece within that second apron window. And another NBA team that's going to have to reevaluate some of the contracts they gave out is the Orlando Magic. They got Franz and Paolo under a rookie max extension, and they also got Desmond Bane. Don't be surprised if they move off those contracts quick.
$50 million is too much.
I was talking to a former GM, and he said what's going to happen, and I want to just kind of get your thoughts of it, and I don't remember it exactly, but it was like, you're going to start making every player a certain price, right? So instead of we're going to pay you 125, we're going to play. No, the puzzle pieces have to fit together. Where we're going to pay you, we're going to pay this class of guy 8, this class of guy 10, this class of guy this. So now if we are trying to get off of a mistake or a trade, the dollars match. Because the dollars have to match dollar for dollar. So then you have to start pairing players dollar for dollar. So you might be above your value or you might be below your value, but they have to pair you in a slot because they can't fluctuate the trades.
Yeah, effectively, you're going to have to figure out analytically your dollars per minute played. And how whatever analytics you use, how much are you willing to pay for this plus minus amount? If the guy's a net plus minus and he's top 10 in the league, okay, but if you don't have the other pieces, you can't, it's a wasted amount of money no matter what, right? It's got to be a finishing piece, not a starting piece, like I said before.
And it's interesting that Cuban mentioned you can't be a starting piece, because for the Lakers, this is the very first time we're going to see a player in Luka who's under a supermax. And I believe in a year or two, he qualifies for the 10-year supermax. So we're going to see the Lakers having to build a championship team with a player that's earning well over $70 million a year. The apron rules were not designed for that. SGA out in OKC is going to start his supermax next season. So it's almost 2 years after winning his championship. He signed for a new supermax, but it's going to start in the 26-27 season. That is great cap management by Sam Presti. But for the Lakers, that shit is in reverse. I don't know if Rob Pelinka could pull it off.
How did we get to this point? To this second apron nonsense and all these rules, all these stipulations we have now that, people are mad about, and they got to actually, to me, do their job and their due diligence and actually hire the right people in their organization to make sure that they set up for the long haul because of these rules. How did we get to this point? I got my thoughts. I want to hear yours.
From an owner's perspective, former owner's perspective that knows other owners, half the teams lose money. Half the teams still lose money because what ends up happening, Perk, even though the TV money goes up, right. A lot, 51% out the door to the players, right? And then on top of that, like the Mavs, we lost tens of millions of dollars when Bally's went bankrupt.
And that's the part about the Luka trade that does not get talked about enough. It makes sense that Mark Cuban has sold the team back in that 2024 season. Not only he lost the local TV revenue, but also he had Luka's Supermax contract coming up. Luka would have been making over $70 million a season had he remained in Dallas. And also, the Mavs still had to figure out Kyrie Irving's contract. The Dumont family, I'm not sure if they were down for paying $3.5 billion to get the Mavericks, than being comfortable paying $150 million a year in luxury tax.
Gone. It's like gone. And there was like hardly anything to replace it from our local TV deal. And so you've got, specific things like that where teams just are losing money. And the only teams that always make money are the New York and LA area teams. And even Boston made some money, not a ton, but made some money.
Now, let me say this. It was very interesting when Brian Windhorst had revealed some of the financials of these teams. The Lakers having LeBron James under the guidance of Jeannie Buss, they weren't making as much revenue as people think. The New York Knicks, in a season in which they did not even make the playoffs, still made $40 million more than the Lakers did. So when I stated earlier with Jeannie Buss not necessarily being in the position to innovate the Lakers, you see how a pandemic plus a following season where they can't have fans in the stands, eventually led her to slowly start selling the team. Mark Walter purchased 27% of the Lakers back in 2021.
We lost tens of millions of dollars when Bally's went bankrupt. Gone. It's like gone. And there was like hardly anything to replace it from our local TV deal. And so you've got, specific things like that where teams just are losing money. And the only teams that always make money are the New York and LA area teams. And even Boston made some money, not a ton, but made some money. But not a lot of other teams, always made money.
Well, but this is an investment, right? And I think that's one of the things
that's kind of what I think is kind of ruining the NBA in some respects.
Yeah, no, tell us.
It's only about value. So there's like talking about more, like I got involved with this group, Harbinger Sports, where it's a private equity fund that only buys minority ownerships, right? Because now I'm an expert on minority ownerships in sports franchises. And there's not a lot of liquidity or marketplace for those ownerships. But for the big private equity companies that are, help the Celtics deal get done, as an example, right? They just want to see a return in their dollars. So they're just trying to push up the valuations. They're not like, it's not like when I came in or even when I left, for the most part, like about fan, right? And so I think that's one of the challenges that got us here is because while, yes, teams want valuations to go up.
You mean owners, Mark? You mean owners want valuations to go up? The real question is, are you guys aware that you could potentially be in a position where you're going to have to allow private equity to almost have complete control of the team?
It doesn't really change the actual operation of the team, and it didn't really force the profitability or push the profitability up, for most teams. So it's kind of a catch-22.
So when people look at how much you bought the Dallas Mavericks for, how much you sold them for 20 years later. And I'm just saying, like MJ, how much he sold it for. Now there's losses every single year.
For the most part, yeah. Other than the years where we sucked. The only time I made money was when we were awful.
Oh, so
great insight right there. Great insight. Once again, Patrick Dumont and his family, they were set up to lose at least minimum $150 million a year in luxury tax by having Luka on that super max deal. And the Mavs being competitive was not even a guarantee. Look at the Phoenix Suns the last 2 to 3 seasons with Kevin Durant. They were paying over $150 million in luxury tax, and they were nowhere near contention.
Well,
because my payroll was nothing. I'm paying Solid Measure, and so it's just,
what was the Clipper? What's the I can't believe it. The Clippers' old owner. What was his name before?
Donald Sterling.
Donald Sterling's team would always suck, but he would make money every single year.
Every single year, because that's what he cared about.
And he didn't try and win. So it was like he wasn't trying to win. Blake and that crew forced him into a position of like, okay, I can't not do something. But ultimately it was he would not field a team and make, I don't know, 20, 30, whatever $1 million a year, but was never competitive. So you're saying that you just have to hold on for the long term, lose whatever, maybe try and cover some of that in taxes.
If you're trying to win. If you're trying to win.
Okay.
Yeah, basically. And you've got to hope that the TV deal pays off the way everybody thinks it will. Because you guys know the media business. You're right in the middle of it, right? It's hard. It's hard from day to day, week to week, year to year. And you just don't know how this TV deal is going to hold up. Like, Peacock paid the NFL like $100 million for one playoff game and added 2 million something subscribers.
Hey, Mark Cuban right here about to reveal the business side of why the streamers are paying so much for the NBA rights, the NFL rights, etc. The proof of concept has to happen on their end, because if not, there's going to be a lot less bidders the next time these TV rights come about.
And when they did that, that made everybody think, well, I'll try to do the same thing with the NBA. But now those bets from the streaming companies that are going to be broadcasting this year have got to pay off. Disney, ESPN, Peacock, Amazon, they've all got to be able to get a return on that dollar, because if they don't, then the whole thing could collapse. But I'm not saying it will. Don't get me wrong. But I'm just saying, as a business guy who tries to analyze the good news and the bad news, there's still risk associated with what's going on.
And there is definitely a lot of risk when it comes to the media side of the revenue, because these tech companies, these major tech giants, they're not necessarily as interested in sports like the leagues thought they would be. Look at Apple. They haven't really dived into many leagues. They're sitting on a bunch of cash. They really just got MLS. They gave them 250 mil. Netflix, for the most part, is in the same boat. But from the sports league so far, they proved that they want the must-see games only. And look at the big dundada of them all, Amazon. They only bid on the NBA's third package. ESPN got the A, NBC got the B, and Amazon got the C package. So you mean to tell me Amazon couldn't outbid ESPN for the premier package? But again, with these tech giants, we're in the era of analytics. And Mark Cuban right here explains how they're going to reevaluate the worth of these sports rights, and also how private equity is going to change things for fans. You guys check it out, and every once in a while, I'll check in.
What would you say to fans that are kind of concerned with the fact that we are in this new reality where teams are now investments? They're not labors of love the way that you ran.
I mean, every team is different. It's unfortunate that that's the way it was handled. I think it's going to be different. I mean, you look at the TV deal, which is the foundation of the economics of the NBA potentially going forward. It's going to be difficult for fans to have all the subscriptions that they need. I haven't added up the numbers. I don't know if anybody has, to see how much it would cost. But to paraphrase the Warriors, it's show business. And when you're in a world where you're trying to get a multiple of revenues, the higher your revenues go, the higher the value of the team goes. And I think what people don't understand from an economics perspective is that not all teams made money. And, they needed revenue sharing in order to get to break even or make a little bit of money. And I'm sure the numbers have changed in the last 2 years. But because of that, and not making money or generating cash from the operations of the team, teams often sold to private equity or other organizations just to get liquidity. So it's like, now I can finally put some money in my pocket. I don't blame them for it, because if you're losing money all these years and trying to win, it's hard to make money and try to win unless you're in the top 3 to 5 market. And even then it can be tough. But so I just think it's going to impact fans in ways that the league is not anticipating yet. I think the biggest question mark for the entire future of the NBA, and I don't think I'm being hyperbolic on this, there was a period of time up until last NFL playoffs, not this NFL playoffs, last NFL playoffs, where TV rights monies were staying about the same. Look at Major League Baseball, right? Their rights money was actually going down, and now they just signed a new deal to get them back. A lot of that is predicated, in my opinion, on the fact that when Peacock got an NFL game, their subscriptions skyrocketed. So the presumption is my perception of it is, well, if you're a subscription service, if this is emblematic of what can happen if we get, NBA or NFL rights, then it's worth paying for it, because you're going to give us the number of subscribers. And if we can just retain those subscribers and not churn them too much, then it's worth almost any amount of money. So we're going to see, come NBA and even NFL for that matter, whether or not these subscription services add subscribers, retain subscribers, or lose subscribers. That defines the entire future of professional sports.
And that's why the new crop of NBA owners are quickly looking at these teams as investment vehicles to get into real estate. All the revenue that will be generated off of that will not be part of that NBA rev share with the smaller market teams. And with the second apron rules, all the team owners are looking to stay under that cap. So that's going to be less luxury tax dollars being cycled. And these smaller market teams, they're going to have to pivot. Owning these teams are going to be much more expensive And the large markets like the LAs, the Golden States, the New York Knicks, don't be shocked if they pivot their revenue streams in ways it can't be shared. So private equity be right there to pimp out the fans and start raising prices no matter what. Look at the Luka trade. They got rid of his ass, and just literally 2 months later, they announced that they're raising ticket prices for the following season.
And that's such a bummer because I feel like in that scenario, fans lose because we just have to spend more, to watch the team. And it becomes harder and harder. But
it does. And that was, part of the challenge I had when I was running the team. That's why I was losing money all the time. Literally we had $2 tickets for years.
Mm-hmm.
We had, $10 tickets, $12 tickets when we raised our prices 20%, right? For at least 1,000 people. We had $29 tickets for 4,000 fans, 4,000 seats when I left, right?
Those aren't available anymore.
And they paid a lot of money. So they, I can understand it. Just like with A-Rod and Mark Lowry, they paid a lot of money.
Yeah, to pay $3.5 billion for the Mavericks and then be saddled with over $150 million in luxury tax just because you gave Luka the extension. This is how business people like Patrick Dumont and his family look at the Mavericks. They're really there for that casino. Any profits from that will not be part of the NBA revenue share, and they might not even care as much about the media rights getting lower and lower.
And so I understand their desire to make the cash flow work. But as long as, teams are going up in valuation, if you have owners that incorporate private equity, people don't give money. Look, I just did a deal with Harbinger Sports to be part of a private equity group that is going to buy and sell minority interest. People don't give money to invest in as minority or majority owners in teams in order to lose money. It's too much money to just be bragging rights. Mm-hmm. It used to be, you put in $100,000, $250,000 10, 15 years ago. That's still a lot of money from somebody, but you can brag, you can get tickets, you get access. Now it's, okay, are they going to put in $25 million to own a smidgen? Is private equity going to put in $1 billion in order to, have a minority interest and with no say in operations? And if you are a part of private equity investor, a special purpose vehicle type thing, you want a return because there's only 20 people in the world that can write a check for an NBA team anymore. Even when you see people with huge net worths, they're 26 in the Forbes 400, they're worth $90 billion. They ain't got $90 billion in cash, mm-hmm. And they'd have to get off of assets, et cetera, which isn't always easy. Some can, but
what are you really saying about Forbes, Mark? They fucking counted El Chapo's money somehow.
So the point of all this is we're in new territory because, even at a $2 billion valuation, somebody could afford it. Ballmer set that path. Even like when I was looking at the Texas Rangers, right? The reason the people who ended up buying the Lakers now, Walters and Todd Bowley, were able to come in for the Dodgers, and the same thing happened with the Rangers. They just kind of got prepaid off the TV money so they can use it to buy $1 billion team. And that changed the economics. Now the economics are beyond that. That's why I think the NBA is not going to expand because the economics just don't work.
Yeah, that expansion looked like it's on hold. NBA Europe looked like it got the green light. But don't be shocked if the Pelicans end up being the team that moves to either Seattle or Vegas.
What would you say to Mavs fans who, Mavs fans can say whatever they want about you, but they know at the end of the day you cared. And I know for a fact whenever the Mavs lose, you don't sleep. Like no. You're pissed, What would you say to Mavs fans who are concerned that the new ownership group, and this isn't just specifically about Patrick Dumont or whatever, but like that guy thinks the finals are called the championship games. Like what would you say to Mavs fans who are concerned that the new ownership group might not really care as much as you do? They do?
They do care. That I can say with 100% certainty. I still talk to Patrick a fair amount. Mm-hmm. And, he doesn't show emotion like I do. That's just not his style, but he does care. And, he cares when we lose. He's spending time to learn. He's learned a ton in time, Now I can talk to him about analytics. I can talk to him about our roster. I can talk to him about 5 out versus making 3, decisions that are made.
Can you tell him to play more 5-out, please?
What's that?
Can you tell him to play more 5-out?
Well, it's going to be tough because we don't have enough 3-point shooters, which
I
is
know,
part of the
which is-
problem, right?
That's-
And so
I've-
that was
I've
the
spent a long
conversation.
time complaining about
We
that,
spent
man.
a lot of hours over the summer talking about just that.
Well, yeah, and that's Patrick and I have talked about that, right? You know, it's kind of a triangle. It's not like Nico and I talking about it. It's Nico talking to Patrick and I talking to and me talking to Patrick, and it's his job to, you know, assimilate all that and make a decision.
And that's the problem with the Mavericks right there. And you're going to have to add Jason Kidd to that triangle. That is a major issue that Dumont's going to have to correct. That information has to be streamlined. It seems like no one wants the responsibility when shit backfires. Notice that was the same sort of communication line with this whole, should we trade Luka, should we not? Nobody really could answer who firmly made that decision.
But I know he cares. I have no doubt in my mind that he wants to win a championship. But he's not me, you know, and he's going to do it his own way.
Going back to private equity real quick, would you say it was more the NBA chasing higher and higher valuations, or was it private equity looking at the NBA and looking at franchises and seeing them as a vehicle that they could also target?
Both.
Yeah.
Both. Because
And like when did that start really? You know, I guess kind of with the VC explosion.
probably
The 2010s.
more 5-6 years ago that I noticed the conversations turning more to valuations.
That sounds very familiar. Seems like when they seen Steve Ballmer purchase the team and how he was able to acquire that land in downtown LA. He was an overall positive for the whole NBA. Even the lowly Charlotte Hornets was able to sell their franchise for $3 billion.
Because some of the people who had bought teams had private equity backgrounds. And so I would bring up in the meetings, how are we going to, we're going to price fans out, it's show business, but they're going to be customers gone, right? It's going to be hard to replace them, da-da-da-da-da. And it would be like, okay, Mark, what are our valuations at now? And it's like, well, Forbes says this about the teams, yada, 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 right? And so I think it was 5-6 years ago that probably started happening. And I raised my voice. I was like, this is bullshit. I know we're a business. Yeah, I know we want to make money, but teams aren't making money. Why aren't teams making money? What are things we can do? Like one of the things I would hammer all the time was social media. We dominate social media, but it's a smidgen of revenue for us relative to TV. Well, there's not money there. I think they need us. Why are we not going to get more money there? And then when Bally's fell apart, it was like, why aren't we going, I would say to them, go to Time Warner, and because I've been in this industry and I understand the technology, I understand the elements. And I was like, go to Time Warner, and since TNT and TBS are going to lose the rights, right? They can work like the Weather Channel. You know how the Weather Channel, whatever city you're in, it shows you the weather for that channel.
Sure.
Well, let them buy up the rights as Bally's falls out, and say, okay, Dallas, we'll buy your rights, but only people in Dallas can see it, because that helps them sell more subscriptions, right, to traditional cable and whatever they stream. It's just, thanks, Mark. Next. Amazon did a great job with the NFL. Pretty much everybody's got it. You don't have to pay for it specifically, right? So if you have Prime, I think Amazon's a great partner. But the challenge is, if these subscriptions don't pick up or don't reach the numbers that Peacock, et cetera, need, then it's going to default back to Amazon and Netflix being the only ones left. Maybe Apple. And maybe ESPN, to be determined,
Well,
right?
there's never been more.
Damn, that's a bad lineup right there. First of all, Apple, Netflix, Amazon, they have all the cash in the world, but they have shown that they are not all in on just buying a whole season worth of games from these leagues. The NBA, NFL, etc., they're just add-ons for these tech companies to keep people in their ecosystems. If there is an eventual fallout because of the subscriptions not going up, there won't be too many bidders left, and that's why the owners are pivoting to real estate and private equity.
To be determined,
Well,
right?
there's never been more uncertainty about regional TV in the NBA's
Well, it's
history
gone.
than there is.
It's gone. It's gone. Right? Local TV is okay and good, but the networks, like Tenga just merged, right? It wasn't a merger of strength. And they've got great, smart people there that are busting their ass to sell, et cetera. But it's hard to get people to turn on a TV, in a traditional TV at the same time, and just streaming from a team, it's hard to get people just to buy a product that's going to be for one team. And so, if it comes down to just, let's just say Disney, Netflix, and Amazon, maybe Apple, but they're changing their mind on sports. They're not going to compete with each other the way the subscription services have this past couple of years and the past couple of deals, in my opinion.
Facts. And I believe Apple is not going to compete at all. They are very brand conscious. Unless you're Oprah Winfrey, you have to be like one of these mega like universal figureheads that won't upset any part of the masses. As long as you're quiet, they might partner up with you. But NBA players are very vocal and they're very culturally relevant. So Apple might not want to tie themselves to that.
So to sum up this conversation, and then we're going to hit a break. Yeah. But I guess, what do you say to the fan that says this doesn't feel like a family, it doesn't feel like a family business anymore? I guess the idea is just like, sorry, that's not what the NBA is anymore.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's just, you see with Wick selling, you see with Jeannie selling, you see with me selling, you saw with MJ selling, teams, the people that we've come to learn and know that have owned these teams for 20 plus years. I'm not 21, I'm not 41 anymore, right? And so a lot of the individual owners are going to age out, and so it's going to change. And who is there to replace us, right?
Private equity, real estate moguls, tech titans, casino titans. That's so far who we've seen come in almost in a gold rush after the pandemic. It's as if they smelled the blood in the water, with a lot of these small-time owners not necessarily being ready during the pandemic for a complete stoppage of just revenue and fans coming in these arenas. That's really one of the trickle-down effects. The NBA almost for 2 seasons missed out on a lot of revenue.
At these prices, the Larry Ellisons of the world, the guy who owns NVIDIA, whatever, they're not 21 either. And maybe the next generation of trillionaires from AI will come in and start buying teams, and that'll change things. And I hope so, because then there's an opportunity to put fans first instead of valuations first. But that is a challenge. It really, really, really is.
So it is what it is. Can't stop change, but unfortunately for a lot of these owners and private equity entities coming in, they do have to understand the audience has a lot more options than in years past. The NBA still has to address the elephant in the room. The demographic of those who are under the age of 18 do not necessarily consume the NBA in the same way. Shit, they don't even have the same interest in the league as a whole. It's just way too many options for them to sit around and wait for their favorite team to rebuild for a couple seasons, then maybe fight for a championship.